Spatz, Assistant Outreach Librarian, and on behalf of Library Director Joe Lucia and the staff of Fallview Memorial Library, I'd like to welcome you to a special event in this semester's Scholarship at Villanova Lecture Series, the Outstanding Faculty Research Award Lecture. Supporting the production of original research is central to the mission of Villanova University, and one of the ways in which the exceptional scholarly achievements of our community are recognized is through the annual presentation to one deserving faculty member of the Outstanding Faculty Research Award. Each spring semester, we are proud to host the current recipient of the award as they present their work here in the library. Before we begin, I'd like to inform you that the Scholarship at Villanova series will continue next Wednesday, February 17th at 4:30 p.m. with a lecture on the writing process by theater professor Michael Hollinger. Information on this and all other library events is available on posters around the library and at our website, library.villanova.edu. This afternoon, we're pleased to have with us the 2009 Outstanding Faculty Research Award recipient, Dr. Charles R. Taylor. Dr. Taylor is the John A. Murphy Professor of Marketing at Villanova University and Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Marketing and Policy Research at the Villanova School of Business. He's an extremely active researcher with over 100 articles, conference proceedings, chapters, and reviews appearing in such top outlets in the field as Journal of Advertising, Psychology and Marketing, Journal of Business Research, and Journal of Public Policy and Marketing. Dr. Taylor has also assumed editorial and review responsibilities for these and many other journals and conference publications, and his writings and editorial activities have garnered awards from a host of journals and conferences. In addition, Dr. Taylor has lectured all over the world on topics in marketing and advertising, has taught courses in China, Korea, Germany, and the Czech Republic, and has worked as a marketing consultant for many prominent corporations, law firms, and industry associations. He also served as president of the American Academy of Advertising in 2005. Here to share his research on the cultivation of stereotypes in a presentation entitled Asian Americans in Advertising, Portrayals of the Model Minority, would you please join me in welcoming 2009 Outstanding Faculty Research Award recipient, Dr. Charles R. Taylor.
Well, thanks a lot for that very kind introduction. I really appreciate all of you being here today in the face of a snowstorm coming. And I want to say up front, it's nice to be talking about something other than the Super Bowl, because everybody wants to know what I think the best Super Bowl ad is. I thought it was Google, for the record, although most of the public thought it was the Snickers ad that appeared right at the beginning. It's always interesting stuff. Again, thanks for coming. It's good to see some real friendly faces here. And I want to talk about a stream of research that I've done. Haven't really picked up on this over the last year or two for reasons that I'll get into. But one thing that's been very rewarding about this stream of research is that it spurred a lot of other research, a lot of master theses and a few dissertations and some academic research that kind of goes, where you suggest research at the end of the article and somebody actually picks up on it. I mean, that's really rewarding, because on a lot of other types of research I've done, you get to the end and you kind of suggest stuff that can't be, very easily be done, or you do it yourself. But in this case, it has been picked up, and we know a lot more now about reaching Asian Americans in advertising, although there's more to be known. There's also a real social side to this. And while I think there's a long way to go, we'll see that there really has been some improvement since I started studying this. But a little bit of an overview of what I'm going to do, and I want to make it clear, I'm really making an effort, kind of ironic, even though this is one of the most intellectual audiences I'll ever talk to, I'm going to try to keep it kind of light, given that it's going to be a snow day and whatnot. And more important, and I'm happy to send anybody copies of the published articles that I've done on this if you are interested in looking at the hypothesis test and making sure the method was perfect and all of that. I can tell you guys, they do beat the heck out of these things in the review process. So things are pretty tight in that regard. But what's interesting about Asian Americans? Well, it's a fast-growing group, and from a business perspective, it's more and more targeted by marketers than before. As of 2007, it became more than a $500 billion market. It is the group with the highest average income in the United States, higher than Caucasians. And it's important to look at portrayals at not just the business side, not just from the business side, but also at a societal level. This is just a little graphic on the buying power of the Asian American population, and you can see here, that it's projected to grow even more going forward. We're at the point where Asian Americans are about 5% of the U.S. population now, so it's pretty significant, and that is projected to grow. This is from the 2000 census, and I could have used more recent projections. I think Asian American household income, it is up over 60,000 now. But just two things I like about this graphic. One is it shows the gap between Asian Americans and all U.S. families from all groups. You know, it was about almost $10,000 difference in 1999. But it also shows the diversity among Asian Americans, and the misnomer it would be to think all Asian Americans are wealthy just based on that average number, because you can see there's lots of differences between the Chinese, Filipinos, Koreans, Cambodians, Hmong, Laotians, and so forth. So in terms of the research, I was looking at whether the model minority stereotype was reflected in advertising portrayals, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. It's kind of a fascinating thing, because a lot of the stereotypes we think of as being held of Asian Americans tend to be more positive things, but there's also really a very negative side to this as well that I'll get into. And I'll take a look at some research on TV portrayals, even though the main study I'm going to talk about here was on magazine advertising portrayals. Okay, so what is the model minority stereotype? You know, I was fortunate enough to be asked to present this research to the Asian American Asia Pacific Law Students Association at Harvard a few years back, and they seem to think the stereotype was like hardworking, poorly dressed geeks, you know, to summarize it. But in terms of being more based on the research and what's been studied, the model minority stereotype suggests that most Asian Americans are very serious, hardworking, good with technology, very good at math and science, successful and well assimilated into American culture, but at the same time not very fun-loving or socially skilled relative to other groups. And there's some, I want to go a little bit further with this. There's a study by a UCLA professor named Yim, where she asked U.S. residents whether they agreed that the various adjectives describe Korean Americans. You can see her, you know, I guess this is no big surprise. 99% said intelligent, 98.6% industrious. You know, I do a lot of survey research, and you cannot get 99% of Americans to agree that the sky is blue. Or you might get 75% to agree that Joe Biden is the president of the United States. These are just off the charts high numbers, you know. Real in-depth survey, and there's been some follow-ups that have really verified the same thing. Perceptions this was a survey of high school students asking what other Asian American high school students were like. And you know, some of the adjectives that came up with high levels of agreement: submissive, humble, quiet, obedient. But you know, some of you guys know my wife, who's Korean American, and boy, it's almost I almost have to laugh at the word obedient there. It demonstrates what a close to I second that. Stay within their own race, want to be Caucasian, this kind of not so nice banana idea type of thing. Poor communicators. FOB stands for fresh off the boat, meaning like not savvy with American culture. So you can see there's a real downside to this model minority stereotype. And you know, I don't think Time Magazine would do this today, but wow, the whiz kids, you know, story on Asian American kids, puts them on the, you know, puts a bunch of Asian American kids on the cover of Time Magazine, calls them the Asian American whiz kids. Well, what if you're not a math genius? I mean, just a little bit of theoretical background on the societal side of this. What is the problem if the model minority stereotype is perpetuated through advertising or media portrayals in general? Well, expectancy theory would suggest that there's an issue that if stereotypes are repeatedly reinforced in the media, it can build expectations that might be hard for people in the group to live up to. You know, the idea that all Asian Americans are serious, all are hardworking, all are good at math. Well, what if you're not? You know, what if you're an Asian American kid who that's not so easy for, or you're more artistic? You know, you might even want to go on to be a creative in an ad agency, for goodness sake, as opposed to a market research person. You know, George Gerbner's from Penn's cultivation theory also suggests that what can be portrayed can become accepted as reality, particularly among members of the public that don't have a lot of exposure to a minority group. The idea is if they get a lot of exposure in the media but not real world exposure, this starts to be accepted as the reality. You know, so the idea that, you know, if there aren't portrayals of Asian Americans as being fun-loving or stylish, this can be accepted as the reality. You know, the public can really believe that all Asian American kids are good at math. I mean, think hard about it. When I say Asian American kids are good at math, we instantly kind of want to agree to that, don't we? Well, the numbers show something very different. The means of an Asian American kid on math are higher, but if you look at the you know, there's dispersion there too, and they're not all good at math. I mean, it shouldn't be that surprising, but it is. You know, some other fallout from the model minority stereotype: it ignores differences between different Asian American groups. The Lee study I alluded to earlier showed pretty compellingly that expectations contribute to anxiety among both high and low Asian American kids. They're embarrassed to seek help if they need it, like to go to counselors compared to kids in other group. Another study by Lorenzo and others, really a sad study to read. It talked about how delinquent behaviors were less likely among Asian Americans, but social problems, poor self-images, and flat-out depression are actually more likely among Asian American kids than among other minority groups. And again, this is not so surprising when you look at it. I mean, we look at the high incomes and the high educational achievement averages and whatnot, and you kind of get the idea that it's easy for this group, but the reality is it's much more complex than that. I want to expose you to a few strong views, and there are some websites like modelminority.com that these views are definitely out there, and if anything, I think there are more radical Asian Americans than they used to be. That used to be, in a way, thought of as like an oxymoron, but there are people who are very attentive in the American community, Asian American community today, and are very sensitive to these types of issues. But the Japanese American Ikimoto, writing back in 1997, argued that the model minority image is used to maintain white privilege against African Americans and Latinos by citing the success of Asians. Saw a recent article where someone was arguing that Indian Americans or South Asians are kind of the new model minority. And it was a similar type of argument that Indian American success was being used you know, to argue that all other minority groups should be successful and it should be easy. So Ikimoto also argued that Asian Americans were viewed as honorary whites, denying the group their own racial identity. Okay, another strong view by Hong, writing in 1993, during our 160-year history, portrayals of Asian Americans have perpetuated insidious stereotypes, including the Eurocentric perception of Asian Americans as foreign, exotic, and non-American. There have been few images that reflect the complexity of Asian American experiences. And one thing I should be clear on, it is complex. I'm going to talk about some of the portrayals of Asian Americans in the media in a minute. You know, there's, you know, like Yao Ming does some celebrity endorsements right now, or Jackie Chan, you know, famous movie star karate guy. Third generation Asian American kids don't relate to Yao Ming and Jackie Chan. You know what I mean? They've grown up in the United States, and these are people who were born in China, you know, why Vietnamese Americans aren't particularly going to have a special affiliation with those types of spokespeople. So it is complicated. And something I want you to think about for a minute, other than there's no question there's been a trend towards some very pretty Asian women being portrayed in the media. but think about in general what types of images we're exposed to in terms of portrayals of Asian Americans on television or as celebrity endorsers and whatnot. And these are some of the most noticed or most popular types of portrayals. And you know, granted, you can think of secondary characters on some TV shows, and I don't mean to suggest there's been no progress made, but it's been very limited. Where are the Asian leading men in movies? Where are the Asian male television anchors on television? Really worth thinking about. But some of the portrayals that are out there are kind of interesting. You know, Harold, and I'll talk about South Asians in a minute. You know, Kumar is a South Asian, and Harold is what we think of as Asian Americans in the United States. Of course, South Asians are Asians as well. But this movie series has these guys, Harold and Kumar. You know, Kumar is particularly like a fun-loving young guy. I don't, saying a little corrupt probably goes a little bit too far, but he gets into a lot of trouble. He uses drugs, he likes girls a lot, and he kind of corrupts Harold in these movies a little bit. And you know, it's interesting because when I presented this to the Asia Pacific law students, they really wanted to know whether I thought this was a good thing, because their parents did not like Harold and Kumar at all. Thought they were bad role models, so to speak. But anyway, you know, I think it is good that this kind of portrayal's out there, just in the sense that, you know, myself growing up in this country, you know, you'd see a film with Sean Penn, you know, doing drugs or something like that. It's not going to make me go out and start doing drugs or anything like that. It does, however, expose you to the full range of activities people are involved in life. And the fact that a lot of Caucasian men are leading men is, you know, maybe gives you some hope with girls at some point in your life or something like that. Exaggerating it a little bit, but anyways, the idea that you get the full range of portrayals is important. And here's William Hung, and I may try to go in and show William Hung's American Idol video if I can here. Let's see if I'm connected to the internet.
Found the next key. What's your name? My name is Ryan. Oh, nice to meet you. Nice to see you, buddy. Let me tell you what I'm gonna sing. I'm singing Ricky Martin She Bangs. She Bangs. Yeah. It's a good song, so it's either I really do well by lighting up the stage, right, or I don't. The producers, cast, and crew would like to express their gratitude to engineering student William Hung for showing up and shaking his bonbon.
William.
Yes. Talk to me, tell me your name. You blow me off like it's all the same. You little blues and I'm taking away like a bomb. Yeah, baby. She bangs, she bangs. Oh, baby, but she moves, she moves. I go crazy cause she looks like a blonde, but she stays like a bee. Like every girl in history. She bangs, she bangs. I'm wasted by the way she... Thank you. You can't sing, you can't dance. So what do you want me to say? You know, I have no professional training of singing. No, we didn't believe it either. Oh, that's the surprise of the century.
Okay, well, you know, the thing there is, you know, there's actually a nice part to this story. William goes on to get a recording contract, and I'll show a little bit of this other clip. But anyways, this does reinforce stereotypes. He's an engineering student. He's so innocent. After that, he's, you know, I have no formal training. You know what I mean? Poor guy. But you know, there's kind of a nice story that people did have some good feelings towards William Hung because of his innocence. You know, and as a result of that, we later see a video like this.
Here we are at the Mayan Theater, where William Hung is shooting his first music video. I'm Jason Clemmer with E-News Live, standing outside the Mayan Theater, waiting for you all with William Hung, shooting his music video, She Bangs. Yeah, let's get in right now. I need to work with them. Everybody's trying to get a piece of William here. What are you doing?
I want you to meet your girlfriend.
I won't put you through any more of this, but oops. Yeah, maybe not intentionally anyway. Yeah, so but anyways, that just the initial incident, I think, just reinforces some of those images that we're talking about. Okay, and then Jackie Chan, obviously a popular star and whatnot, but the popularity is kind of rooted in karate and kung fu and him beating up guys using traditional Asian martial arts, and in and of itself, that's not a bad thing. You just like to see a wider array of portrayals. Okay, back to some of the research. Did a study with my research assistant, Ju-Young Lee, back in 1994. And I came to Villanova in 1992, so it was really one of the early studies that I did here. And at this time, there was a very nice stream of research on portrayals of African Americans and of Latinos, and this was kind of a new area to study. And basically, we studied a large sample of magazine ads, and we found that Asian Americans at that time were depicted in just 4%. The Asian American population at that time was a little bit under 4%, so you can kind of judge for yourself whether that's like a real significant underrepresentation or not. But it's not so many ads that Asian Americans were typically seen by the public, and the portrayals that did exist were pretty heavily skewed towards technology-based products, and this really is a big issue. 90% of the portrayals were for technology-based products like computers or automobiles or something like that, and you would almost never see an Asian American then in a clothing ad, in an ad for a fast food place, or some type of food. Anything not based on technology. The Asian Americans that were in advertising then tended to be in business and science publications, overwhelmingly in business relationships as settings, as opposed to being depicted in a family relationship or a social relationship. And we actually called that study Not in Vogue: Portrayals of Asian Americans in Advertising, because a whole 2-year period of Vogue magazine didn't have a single Asian American model. I mean, zero. I mean, it's hard to imagine that today. There's a lot of advertising in Vogue as well. Working with my friend Barbara Stern at Rutgers, who has since passed away, we published an article in Journal of Advertising in 1997 where we did an analysis of a big sample of television commercials, basically a week's television commercials from the major networks. And we found higher representation of Asian Americans at 8.4%. A few years had passed. The mid-90s were very much of a period of emphasizing diversity in business schools, so not surprising that it would pick up a little bit. But we really found the same stereotypes portrayed, skewed towards technology-based products, towards business relationships and settings. Very few depictions of Asian Americans in family relationships or home in social settings. And although 8.4% was a high figure, there was some evidence of backgrounding in the ad. The idea that there'd be 8 people in the ad, so you just make sure you throw in one Asian American in the ad. It's interesting because when I'm at Korea University in the summer, they do this with Caucasians, because I was teaching their global MBA, and I've never actually had a Caucasian student in one of my classes there, but the Caucasian students are very well represented in their promotional brochures. So. And I want to mention, to give you some idea, I just picked a few that are like prototypes, and by the time we started doing our research, the really blatant stereotypes were gone. Like you see this, you see this little guy that's kind of a stereotypical portrayal of someone who's Chinese, just saying at your grocer in this Chungking chow mein ad. There used to be in the 50s, even into the 60s, a lot of ads that would show that blatant level of stereotype. Something that's more typical, and this is pretty recent. But this is a good example of the type of ad that you see Asian Americans in. And yes, this is Lucy Liu, who went to the University of Michigan like I did, so that's why the slides are maize and blue, by the way, if you're wondering. But anyways, this is an ad for Intel, high-tech company, right? And they've got, it wouldn't be that surprising if they, if they didn't have all the background, but they've got Lucy Liu in the foreground here. And some would argue that that may be an attempt to capitalize on this stereotype of Asian Americans as being savvy. I wouldn't necessarily draw that conclusion if I'd only seen this ad, but over looking at a lot of ads, it can't be a coincidence that you're much more likely to see an Asian American in an ad in a product category like this. Although really I have to say, really recently, the last 3 or 4 years, we're seeing more examples of portrayals that are better in non-technology categories than ever before. And this is the type of thing that I think it's important to see more of. And this is Anna Wang, and this is a print ad campaign that's forthcoming for Maybelline, where she's the spokesmodel in this case. So we really are starting to see some improvement in the situation, although I just saw a master's thesis that came out that really over a broad sample of ads still suggests that there's not really enough of this going on yet. Okay, the main study I want to talk about today is a study I did with, was published in 2005, that I did with Stacy Landreth, who was here at the time, and with my wife, Hae-Kyung Bang, where we analyzed 1,885 ads from 2003 and 2004. These were magazine ads. We did reliability checks where we used Cohen's Kappa to correct for chance agreement. We used 4 magazine categories: general interest, women's, business, and science. We really wanted to replicate the study from 10 years earlier and see if the situation had changed. We did make a point of including magazines with high Asian readership to see if they were, to see if that drove results, and it really proved that it didn't. The idea is that you would expect that magazines with low Asian readership might have fewer Asian Americans in the ad, but that really didn't seem to have much impact. I do want to mention the South Asian dilemma. We very much struggled with this because in the first study there were so few South Asians as defined here, basically the Indian subcontinent, that there really wasn't much decision to be made on whether to include South Asians, or Indians is how a lot of Americans think of it. But by the time of this study, the representation was up to about 1.5% to 2% of the ads, and we really, we could have analyzed those separately. You get into trouble with the statistical tests with that few ads, though, even with this big of a sample. So we chose not to lump portrayals of South Asians with East Asians, and I mean this leads to another issue in American society. I mean, when we say Asian Americans, we really usually mean East Asians, don't we? And then we'll say Indians, but obviously South Asians are Asians as well. Okay, the results in terms of representation, Asian American representation went up to 10.5%. Recall that it was 4% just 10 years earlier, but you can see what's happening with the other groups. Latino Americans, there's a separate stream of research on this, and there's a lot of theories as to why the representation is low. It's probably a valid point that it's more difficult to code who is Latino and who's not. We try to overcome this by using Latinos to code ads that might have Latinos in them. But I don't think there's any question over the broad range of studies that there's some underrepresentation. There is a separate Spanish language media in the United States. That might have something to do with it. But I don't think there's any question that by the time we got into the 2000s, given how well represented they are in the population, Latinos are actually more underrepresented than Asian Americans now in terms of overall numbers. in the mainstream media anyway. In terms of representation by magazine type of the portrayals of Asian Americans, we found 16.4% of ads in business magazines had Asian Americans. General interest went way up over the previous study. Women's magazines remained an issue where just 3.7% of the ads had Asian American females. Kind of surprising on a few grounds. One of which is Asian American females. If you look at the index numbers for purchases of like high fashion items or high-end cosmetics, are actually pretty heavy purchasers of those products. So intuitively this doesn't make sense. I've been doing some research with a professor named Ensue who teaches at Yonsei University in Korea, and something that's interesting is even in women's magazines in Asia, there tend to be more Caucasian models than you would think. So I don't think there's an easy answer as to the reason why the level of representation in women's magazines is so low. But we are just in the last year, we're starting to see news stories like Armani uses its first Asian American model, Victoria's Secret uses its first Asian American model. So the tide may be turning a little bit. Percentage of group portrayals in technology-based product categories, and again, this is what I'm getting at when I'm suggesting that while the situation has improved, it's not completely resolved by any means. And this master's thesis that just came out with, where the data was collected in 2008, had really quite similar numbers. But when you look at the percentage of the portrayals in technology-based categories, I mean, just look at the first two lines. 77.1% of the Asian American models appear in technology-based product categories. It's only 38.3%, for Caucasians. So, roughly half, half of that amount. In terms of settings of ads depicting Asian Americans, there were a few more, there were more in outdoor settings than previously, but home and social settings are still very underrepresented. You just don't see that many ads with Asians in home and social settings. I may want to take a harder look, but even in preparing this presentation, I tried to go in and find something on the internet. I could have went through my magazines and went through the process of scanning it and whatnot, but it's not easy to find these ads, where they're in home and social settings. In terms of it, I think this is a real big issue. The relationships in which Asian American models are depicted, only 6.5% of the time where there's a relationship setting is it a family setting, 70.4% in business settings. And the numbers for Caucasians, for example, are very, very different. This is really skewed. So conclusions, Asian Americans are better represented in magazine advertising than 10 years ago. At the same time, stereotype portrayals still do persist. We still do see remnants, more than remnants. We still see significant elements of the model minority stereotype in the ads that are out there today. Asian Americans are seldom depicted in family and social contexts, and with increasing evidence that minority groups respond better to ads with realistic portrayals of the groups, marketers should rethink advertising strategies. And we're starting to see them do this. There is a very nice stream of literature developing on how to appeal to minority consumers. Frankly, though, I think we've really learned more that's applicable about targeting African American consumers. There's compelling evidence with African American consumers that having an African American in the ad portrayed realistically, if the African American consumer views the portrayal as realistic. And by realistic, I don't necessarily mean you can't take some license. Like if any of you saw a lot of people like the Doritos ad in the Super Bowl, where the kid is very protective of his mother and threatens the guy that's dating his mother. That would qualify as a realistic portrayal. But you can do this without alienating Caucasians and other minority groups is what the research is showing. The Caucasian audience isn't so concerned that there's a Caucasian in the ad as long as it's a good ad. You know, with Asian Americans, it's a little bit more complex because of the diversity of Asian Americans, because of the difference between immigrants, second generation, third generation. So we still need to learn a lot more about it. But we do see some evidence. I don't want to end on a real pessimistic note, because it's nice to be researching something where you are seeing some improvement and some additional effort. That said, I think there's a long way to go, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd be glad to take questions if there are some. Yeah.
As a historian, I'm interested in how we got from one thing to another. Now, these stereotypes in some ways reflect what American attitudes are, or what Americans expect to see or something. Think about Chinese Americans, for instance, and we had a variety of old stereotypes 75, 100 years ago. There was the villainous Fu Manchu in movies and fiction. There was the Dragon Lady and Terry and the Pirates, you know, kind of, well, whatever. And, you know, they were all off-putting, you know. You can't trust these people. These people have, you know, other goals or something. And now we have the model minority, which is somebody to be admired, I guess is what we're showing them in the ads. Now this involves, I guess, a lot of social psychology, but how did the American public get from one attitude about them to another? Got any theories?
Well, it's a real good question, and we'd probably come at better answer if you and I sat down and talked about it, since you're a historian. But I do think the further we got removed from World War II, where the Japanese were an adversary, and even Vietnam. If you go to these Asian American sites, one thing that's real controversial lately is that John McCain has been quoted to say that he hates the gooks who captured and tortured him. And this is now a really controversial statement, right? There are many Asian Americans who think that a U.S. senator shouldn't be using that term, even though he was literally tortured. So I think certainly some of it has to do with how we're further removed from these wars. We've got an economy that's trading. Japan is an ally in many senses now. Even with China, well, I suppose it could be debated the degree to which we're a political ally with China. We're certainly economically intertwined, so there's a greater realization of the importance of trade. And the other thing is the Asian American population is growing. I mean, when I talk about expectancy theory, I think it's getting rarer where people grow up in, at least in suburban or urban areas, where they're not exposed, to Asian Americans. I mean, I grew up in kind of an outer suburb of Detroit. It would be kind of like, out towards Westchester here. And when I grew up there, when I went to high school, I don't think we even had 1% African Americans or 1% Asian Americans. If you went back to where I went to high school now, that would be a very different picture as the demographics of the U.S. change. So I think that's some of it too. But I don't mean to pretend that this is a great answer. I think there are some real historical and deep sociological reasons behind it, and that these perceptions change gradually. But some of it, some of the issue with the model minority stereotype is just getting over this idea. It's the whole idea of a stereotype, that the reality is very different from the average. Sometimes, all of us, I mean, if you look at the average for a race, all of us are better at some things than the average person in our race too. And at least me, I'm not as good at a lot of things than the average, the average person in our race. In my race, I should say. Yeah, close.
A negative, sort of the counterpart of the intelligent is if I would have been curious what the numbers would have been if you had asked creativity or creative instead of intelligent. If you had put creative, it seems to me that one of the downsides of this over emphasis on the intelligence of Asians is that they are not creative. They are sort of rote. They learn by rote. They learn by obedience and so forth, and it suppresses creativity. And you find that as a stereotype a lot. And it totally ignores the fact that now more and more Asian Americans are in fashion and in design and so forth. What do you say about that? Is there a rethinking, or do you feel like that's still a very ubiquitous stereotype?
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's still ubiquitous. Although your kids went to Radnor High, right? I mean, if you went to Radnor High, you probably know better, right? Because you're exposed to enough Asian American kids that are creative. Although there's probably still that stereotype that many are good at math too. So I mean, I do think the first-hand exposure, but there are some studies out there that do say exactly what you cited, that the perception is Asian Americans aren't very creative and watch. My son's still 9 years old, so I don't want you guys to think I just watch cartoons in my free time of my own volition. But just look at the credits, of any cartoon, or you get a lot of Asian Americans that that participate in the writing of that. And again, it's kind of it might be kind of counterintuitive, but Klaus, I think you're exactly right. Yeah, Kevin, go.
Yeah, Ray, I was wondering, because you kind of left it out there, the Harold and Kumar thing, but it's just kind of one farcical example of crazy behavior where the focal actors are not like white stone dudes, right? Going back to your Sean Penn historical analogy, it's about 30 years ago, I think, the movie you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering about like other kind of very high-profile Asian Americans in places they haven't been, and the effect of that more recently. I mean, as a Phillies fan, we know we got hammered by a Japanese American. I mean, he was the one who did us in. Very high-profile in an American sport. If we think about comedy, the guy that was in Funny People, who's getting a lot of play, he's, I guess in your classification, South Asian, but very funny. And he has a nice kind of spin that hasn't been there before. And so I'm wondering, what is the impact of people that are doing things in a high-profile way that are unexpected in changing perceptions of Asian Americans?
Yeah, well, I do think it has to help. One thing I will say with the with the athletes, I mean, a lot of them aren't really Asian Americans, right? They're like Japanese players who are playing here, so it's a little bit different. Although he's just starting to get a lot of press. There's the one college basketball player who's Asian American, yeah, that's getting a lot of press. But I mean, I do think that only helps. Politics would be another area where that could be helpful. But still, I mean, if you look at if you go to some of these Asian American websites, there's a real angst that, for example, there just aren't Asian American leading men. And there's a lot of resentment over. I mean, if you look at the numbers, a lot more non-Asian males, myself being an example, marry Asian females than the other way around. And there's a lot of discussion on these boards about and obviously the real answer to that is quite complex. It's not easily answered, but there's a lot of concern about it. But again, I think more portrayals in just a broader range of areas. And what you're suggesting, Kevin, I don't mean to suggest at all that the situation's not gradually getting better, and it's my belief and hope that it will continue to get better just as people get more exposed to these talents. And one other thing that I don't think gets brought up enough, I mean, if you look at the census data, a lot of the Asian immigration has been so recent that there's still a majority of first generation among the Asian community. So significant subset of it, some that don't speak English, some are English language, and as you get second and third generation, Well, I mean, my son Mitch is 9 years old, and he's, you know, we adopted him, and he's from Korea. And I remember him coming home at, I don't remember whether he was 2 or 3, but he was he was, you know, very, very young. And one day he came home from daycare, like shortly after he started going there, and he just said, "Daddy, I'm dark light, and Miss Alicia is light, and you're light, and Mommy's dark light, and Paige, his African American friend, is dark." And at that age, he was realizing that he was different, but was a little bit sad. He didn't like it. You know what I mean? He came home that day not liking the fact that he wasn't the majority, and it was really pretty compelling. That said, I mean, he goes to Eichton Elementary School, and so far so good. You know what I mean? I think they do an excellent job with diversity, and I think more and more of the schools are celebrating diversity. So hopefully the future path has good things in store. But you know, I'm not Asian American myself. It's not easy for me. I'm very reluctant to make real positive predictions. You know.
And I guess what I was saying, I was thinking about perceptions of the general white American out there who doesn't have particular access, or maybe is not that thoughtful or reflective. I'm just wondering whether these early kind of disconfirming but very visible events, to what degree that will have a more than anticipated effect. And so what kind of critical mass do you need to see, and this is what I'm kind of interested in your thoughts, of these sorts of portrayals would maybe shift, especially in the generation that's coming up, Mitch's generation, and maybe 10 years older.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Kevin, because it's, I'm not so impressed yet when I see that Victoria's Secret hires their first Asian model. You know what I mean? That's a positive step. But why is it even a news story that they're hiring their, or you know, Armani just did the same thing. It's like the other companies are doing it, so they're following suit. But when you get to the point where that's not a rare occurrence, and you know, and it's kind of a regular thing, and it doesn't even make the news, that's good. But I do. There's no doubt what you're referring to can only be the positive force, and when it goes beyond kind of tokenism. Which I think it's which I think it's starting to. I mean, one good thing, you know, in my field, marketing, I can tell you the marketers I deal with, you know, they treat people like consumers, and well, I wish all marketers did a better job of it all the time. That's what we try to teach. But for the most part, the businesses are trying to appeal to the consumer with products that they want, and as a matter, you know, and if there are ways, I even saw something recently on like the top 10 marketers to Asian Americans, and AT&T was #1, you know, to give you some idea. I think we're going to see more effort, and you know, potentially that can be a positive force. I mean, it's nice even to, you know, to be able to show you that Maybelline ad, you know, that I just showed, because you know, 5 years ago I just wouldn't have been able to find anything like that. Okay, well, I think we should let everybody get out of here and beat the snow, but it's really been a pleasure talking to you guys. Thanks so much for taking the time.